My name is Tammy Mammal, and I was Kirsten's 7th grade English teacher. I'm a teacher at Willow Creek Middle School, and Kirsten was what I'm sure all of her teachers would agree. She was a dream student.
Thank you. Well, yeah, it's all true. That's an interesting. I was at the Mayo High School earlier today, and one of the conversations that we ended up having in some of the classes was what is a memoir as compared to an autobiography, or like what is it that you've done with your story that's true, but is somehow different or incomplete, or that was my words. I was giving them those words of like, yes, there is a story here and it is true, and yet it is also incomplete. And there's a difference between approaching something from like a fact-checking kind of perspective, which is really how I started. I think part of the writing process for me, but then also realizing what is true in a story and true for one person in a story that many people can lay claim to is another question. And so it's cool to also be able to hear what of those pieces of that trueness other people find. Because I think as much as I have a story and you all have in many ways been able to access it through these words, it's not necessarily that my story is ever going to be anybody else's story, and not even the same as the other 4 people that were like smack in a car the same day I was. Because I had a conversation also recently because my phone died, and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? My phone died. We like use that language all the time for something, and we're like, okay, how am I gonna like find the contacts that were on it, and I think about the same way, like, how do I figure out like my dad's friend that knew him in college that like maybe probably wants to know that he died, but like, right, and all of a sudden I was like thinking about like, oh, my phone died, but then like, and what it's like to like pick up a new phone and say like, okay, well, this one is a little bit, like the keyboard's kind of funny and I keep hitting the wrong keys every time I'm trying to type a message. And I kept thinking about like all the times I would like wake up and feel like I was, I couldn't like pick the right pair of clothes to wear because none of the, like I never wanted to like go to school because doing the whole like mechanical kind of process that I think the school day felt like was like just, it was a mismatch. And so all of a sudden I started thinking more about, I have a story of loss and a story of death, but what are the ways that we actually, have the face of death in our lives in so many, like, in so many different faces, right? In so many different ways. Because the other thing that a story like this kind of made me think was like, especially even going about the work of writing a story like this, is that I'm documenting something. And having younger sisters, I felt like, I need to be able to document this person that, I can so clearly know in my head, but that is much more foggy for my 7-year-old sister. And so doing that and starting to realize, like, there were things that I knew I was never going to experience again. And I may read from that section of the book here in a moment, but then there are also things that I like never expected I would be like more connected with my dad again. And the best example that I have right now is when I was a 9th grader, which is in some ways the main character of this book is the 9th grade version of myself. I loved ice cream, but today I'm lactose intolerant. And so the today version of me says like, oh, God, that thing I loved is gone from me, right? And I can't even answer the question of like, what's your favorite food anymore? Because it's like, I don't know, maybe I'll say kale or something, because that seems cool. But and then I think about, gee, we'd go and we'd set the table, and there'd be 5 glasses of milk and 1 glass of water. And the glass of water was the glass of water that my dad would drink. And all of a sudden I'm thinking to myself, oh, why was he drinking a glass of water? And I'm realizing, oh, there's something here that now I'm accessing it now as a 25-year-old that I never thought as a 14-year-old I would ever feel that connection with him again. Thought it was all gone, always, forever. And so starting to see both that, not only does loss and death have different faces in my life, but also has, whether it's my phone, right, or something else, but also that there's these blossoming moments that come around even after I thought everything was gone, is all of a sudden this beautiful dance. I kept doing this motion today of there's this dance that goes on between the things that we feel are really dark and we wish never happened, and then the things that we start to realize are blossoming in us. And the first half of the book is really, I would characterize it as it's the story of a car accident and my dad dying. But then the second half of the book, which I get to tell you about because it wasn't in my introduction, is when my mom decides to go to medical school as a 48-year-old woman. And I think about, at the time, it was there had been this hole that had been just ripped, ripped out of me. There's this hole, and there's just stuff spewing out that I'm just losing, always, constantly, more things that I'm losing. Maybe they're running away from me sometimes, but sometimes it just feels it's just spilling or leaking. And then all of a sudden to say oh, there's something that actually, because there's an opening that can come back in, and there's an opening now for something else to come in and something else to take root and to grow in the opening that I thought was all taking things away from me. And so then it gets to be part of the second half of the book. It's just this wonderful, I think, sense of possibility. And I was talking earlier, that moment for me of seeing her do that was, I'd just come from, I was my first year of college, and I'd just come from Rochester Mayo High School, where if you sat around our lunch table and you asked us what we wanted to be when we grow up, it would be cardiologist, gynecologist, pediatrician, and then I'm gonna be an ER doc. And it was I remember listening to this and thinking that's amazing. I love that there's these specialties that people have in, the work that they do every day. And also, how do you know? Because I had a whole life that was, it was that life, right? My dad was a physician, and so, I had access to that space, and I knew, what that track of life looked like. And it was all there in front of me, and then in a moment it was gone. And it was all shattered. And I realized, that path I thought was there is not there anymore. And so I just want to know, how do you know? How can you know that far down? Because I don't feel like I can know anymore. And then that's when I hear my mom say, I'm going to go to medical school. And I'm thinking, that's what, Susan and Amit in my math class are doing. But I can't think of, especially as a parent, it's you want to make choices for your kids, and I am very, I try to be honest in the story of how much I don't know about what my mom went through in her own part of this story, right, of just the early days of not having a partner anymore and trying to have 4 kids and what that looked like. But, have you even continuing to this day to have conversations with her about how did you think through, financial things, or all these pieces. I'm speaking at the National Life Insurance Conference earlier, or next spring, and so I was having conversations recently about how did you manage life insurance stuff afterwards, because I never saw that, right? The person that wrote this, that's the character in this book, never saw that. And so I see all these choices she made for her children. And then you look at that choice of going back to school and you think, what's that about, right? And as much as that is a moment for her, right? And I love that for her, the seed of going to medical school was something that was planted when she was my age. And that it was something that was there but never came to fruition, and all of a sudden there was a new moment in life that it could. But I also, what I love is that there's this beautiful way in which her making a choice that maybe looked like a choice for her, because she was going back to something she cared about, was also really a gift to the four of us. Because being able to see, from the one side, to see her enjoy something or care enough about something to really just throw herself into it with just the kind of, knowing that there's risk, but knowing that there's also something there that she needed to do. Seeing somebody do that is really pretty amazing, and seeing that up close. But then also just the gift that she gives us now, today, when I get to tell you about this sister's at college, and this sister's traveling, and this sister's doing this fantastic stuff, and we're all in our own worlds, and yet we also all know that mom's got her own world too. She's not she could have made a choice to give everything to us, and then also, this day when the last child is no longer at home, what does mom do? But instead, this choice that she made was one that now almost makes me feel good about knowing, if I'm not at home, she's with her patients, and she loves it, and she's there. And it's just interesting to think about how the ways that when we step outside of these narratives we tell ourselves about growing up and having a job and then having a vacation with your 3 kids and then your, or however many kids you want, and then what it's all going to look like, these stories of the American dream success. And then to think when we let ourselves step out of it, there are so many beautiful journeys and beautiful gifts that are also outside of that path, even if in our own experience of it, it seems like maybe I'm doing something selfish, maybe I'm doing something because I'm trying to be in spite of my brother who did it this way, all the ways that we could make choices that go against the grain, or that momentum we have that we think are because of other people, or we think that's not thinking enough about other people. So I think that's a really fascinating way that the story turns. So I'm going to read a little bit now, because that's also a really fun part of being able to, it's fun for me to be able to read out loud, but also I was recently at a reading of Alice Walker's latest book of poetry, which was phenomenal. She wrote The Color Purple many years ago, and I think she has now over 35 books. Some of them are poems, some of them are fiction. It's just amazing how prolific she is, and it was just fabulous to see her, just the experience of somebody reading something they wrote, I think is, I enjoy it, but then again, I guess I'm the writer in the room, so maybe that's my perspective, is what I'll say. So give me a moment here while I flip to a page here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to read 2 sections. One that kind of highlights the piece I was sharing about, which is the things you start to realize you're losing after someone has died. And this particular moment doesn't have a lot of reflection on that, but it just kind of paints a picture of what that was for me. And then I think I'm going to do a second reading, which is more of the piece around what you might see taking root in that opening. So just to give you a roadmap of where we're going. So this chapter is called Mississippi. When I was in 1st grade, we got to choose our own challenge spelling words. One Monday night, Dad had to run back to the Marshfield Clinic to finish up something from work that day. He asked if I wanted to join him in the car. As we drove to the clinic, he said, "Kirsten, talk to me. Your pop. What's happening at school this week?" "I have to pick my challenge spelling words for Friday." "Did you have a pretest today?" "Yeah." "How'd it go?" "I got all the words right, and so I need to pick challenge words." "What about Mississippi?" "Dad, Mississippi. I know how to spell that word already." What about Tuesday?" "We did the days of the week last month on our spelling test." Pulling into the parking lot of the clinic, he turned his head toward the building. The name St. Joseph's Hospital was plastered on the wall. "How about hospital?" "Hospital? How do you spell that?" "Look, it's right there on the wall. Hospital. There. You focus on learning how to spell hospital while I run inside lickety-split to get this sample off the machine, okay?" Sitting in the car by myself, I spelled hospital several times. Hospital. 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 I saw Dad walking back toward the car through the windshield. "How do you spell hospital, Kirsten?" he asked as he opened the driver's side door. Hospital. "Perfect. Let's have a perfect spelling test on Friday with your challenge words. Alrighty, Roo?" 4 days later, Dad walked into the house after work. I averted my gaze, continuing shuffling through first grade homework papers lying around my feet. "Hey, who's the spelling word champion this week?" I continued to look down at my papers without responding. "Kirsty, how'd it go?" he prodded. I slowly lifted a long, skinny piece of paper that said spelling test across the top, and my handwriting scrawled on 15 lines down the page. There was one red circle around a word at the bottom. Hospital. "Kirsten, what happened?" he asked, pulling the page closer to look at it in more detail. "I got hospital wrong." "How?" he asked gently. "I wrote Hopsital. I messed it up." "Kirsty girl, look at that. You messed it up. How's it supposed to be?" Hospital. "See, don't worry. You know how to spell it. You just made a little mistake. You'll never forget it again." He chuckled and gave me a kiss on the cheek. Oh boy, those are fun moments, right? And those are the ones, right, that even to read about it, it just warms my heart a lot. And it's what I think about and what I thought about when I thought about all the things that were getting taken away from me. But then I became lactose intolerant, and I thought, gee, this is wonderful. I'm kidding. But it's its own kind of thing, I guess. So then I guess I'm just going to read from actually the last page of the book, which I feel like is kind of a funny thing. I don't usually choose to read here, so surprise for all of you. It's just kind of the moment that I'm ending the story on, because I think a question that I had as I was writing this is, I'm 23 and I'm writing a memoir, and I had some other writer friends who I was talking to about having working on it. And at the time, they were just like, "Oh yeah, writing a memoir, okay, cool." And then later, after the fact that it was published, and I was talking to them again, they were like, I was actually sitting there looking at you thinking, like, what? 23 and you're writing a memoir, like, what are you gonna write about? Like, how are you gonna do that? Where did, you're like, your life is ahead of you. Like, what are you talking about? And in some ways that was part of the question, right? Of like, where does this story begin and where does this story end? I would argue now, even as a 23-year-old, you could, write a memoir about 1 week of your life, and you'd still have many, 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 many weeks to write about. You could have a lot of books from that. But I think I really wanted to end this book, not necessarily with the conclusion of like a chronological story of where my life was going, because it became pretty obvious every day and every week that I sat down to do some more writing that my story in my life was going to keep going after the book was done, and that there was really never going to be a like most updated version of where the book ends, because it was just going to always keep going. And so really, I think what ended up being true to the story in a way that I could not have planned from like my head was to really end it kind of after the emotional journey found I wouldn't say it found a close, but it just found a different kind of like groundedness. Because I think when we talk about the grief journey, we can think there's all these different phases of it, and maybe you pass through it sequentially, and then maybe you go backwards through it, and then maybe you like popcorn between like phase 1 and 5 and then 2 and then 1 again. And it's like, especially for me, it felt very like uncontrollable. And one day I would be angry, and one day I'd be envious, and one day I'd be sad, and one day I just didn't want to talk about it at all. And so I think in many ways, ending, and in the story itself, I think I wanted to be able to have that sensibility a little bit to it, of just how much there is that you don't know, or that feels outside of what I felt like I should be able to do on a normal day. And so then to end and find actually a place of this kind of emotional grounding is probably the best I could ask for, and the best I could ask for in any given moment when I might want to write the last word of the book, because there'll be another moment, maybe 5 years, maybe 5 minutes, where I might feel sad, or I might feel angry. And it's not to say that it's as strong as it was before, because it changes over time. Those emotions change, but being able to have found a groundedness and then like know that that's possible for myself after having such a sense of like chaos and crazy energy, I think I guess I don't have any other last words after that. So I'm going to read this last paragraph here. It has taken so much to get here, and will take so much to go from here. But for this moment, now, I feel glad. There's nothing so satisfying as the feeling I've done everything I could for the moment. Sure, it comes with missing people not in my presence, or wondering why things are the way they are. Those questions haven't left me. But the only person I can answer to is myself. And in the lucky moment when I've done that today, I'm glad. I'm glad, and I'm grateful for the call, the courage, curiosity, the experiment, failures or successes, and mostly just a string of moments which add up to this one. I can and I will choose to risk gladness more than anything else. I will be grateful, and I will be glad. And then, of course, there's the real last lines of the book, which are, that's how I tell my story. Your turn. So those are going to be my last words right now, and would like to turn it over now for a few minutes of some questions. Like I said, you all have your own readings of this and faces of it. So thank you for your attention.